In the historic center of Quito, Ecuador, tourists walk across a stone courtyard every single day without knowing they're standing on a crime scene. It's the atrium of the Church and Convent of San Francisco, one of the oldest and most important buildings built anywhere in South America. And if you know exactly where to look, you'll find something the guidebooks mention almost as an afterthought. One paving stone that simply isn't there. Locals will tell you, completely seriously, that no one has ever been able to fill that gap. Every stone placed there disappears by morning. They call it the Devil's Missing Stone, and the story behind it begins almost 500 years earlier with an impossible deadline. In the late 1500s, Quito was becoming one of the crown jewels of Spanish colonial South America, and its churches were meant to prove it. The Convent of San Francisco was the most ambitious project of them all, built to be grander than anything else on the continent. Its atrium, the great open stone courtyard in front of the church, was meant to be its crowning achievement. The friars in charge set a completion date so tight that even the most experienced builders privately admitted it might be impossible. The man given final responsibility for the atrium's stonework was a mestizo builder named Francisco Cantuña. Cantuña had earned his position through genuine skill, not privilege, which made the friars' impossible deadline feel like a personal trap. The atrium wasn't finished on time. The consequences wouldn't just be professional. In that era, they could be devastating, even fatal. Week after week, Cantuña pushed his crew harder, and week after week, the impossible math of the deadline only grew worse. Stone had to be quarried, carried, cut, and precisely fitted by hand. An enormous task even with unlimited time, which he did not have. With only days left before the deadline, barely half the atrium's stonework was actually complete. Cantuña began walking the unfinished courtyard alone late at night, doing calculations in his head that never came out in his favor. He knew failure meant more than losing his position. In the world he lived in, it could mean ruin for his family or worse. One night, unable to sleep, he left his home and walked back to the construction site alone, needing to see the impossible math for himself again. The city was silent in the way only a colonial mountain town at midnight can be. No carts, no voices, just his own footsteps on stone. He reached the atrium and stood at its edge, staring at the unfinished half like it was mocking him personally. Under his breath, more out of exhaustion than real belief, said the kind of thing desperate men have said in every century. He'd give anything to finish it in time. He didn't expect an answer, but the air around him changed anyway, the temperature dropping in a way that had nothing to do with the mountain night. A low voice, calm and unbothered, spoke from somewhere behind him, close enough that he felt it before he consciously heard the words. When Cantuña turned, a tall figure was already standing there, wrapped in shadow, ember-red eyes catching what little light remained. The stranger didn't introduce himself directly. He simply said he'd overheard Cantuña's problem and that problems like this had solutions. Cantuña, exhausted and desperate enough to entertain anything, asked what kind of solution a stranger appearing at midnight could possibly offer. The voice offered to finish the entire atrium himself, every remaining stone, cut and placed perfectly before the sun rose the next morning. Cantuña laughed despite himself. Half a courtyard of precision stonework in a single night wasn't just difficult, it was physically impossible. The voice simply repeated the offer, patient and untroubled, and added that impossible was a very different word for someone like him. Cantuña asked the obvious question next. What would something like that actually cost him? The answer came without hesitation. Soul delivered the moment the final stone of the atrium was placed. The shadow shifted forward just enough for Cantuña to see him clearly for the first time. The horns, the ember-red eyes, one cloven hoof pressed into the dirt. Cantuña's first instinct was to refuse outright and walk away, but he made himself stop and actually think about the terms instead. There was one condition he noticed immediately buried in the wording that felt like the only possible way out. The work had to be completely finished. Every single stone with absolutely nothing left undone, exactly at the moment the sun's first light touched the courtyard. If even one stone was missing when the sun rose, the contract's terms wouldn't technically be met. And an unmet contract might mean nothing was owed. It was a thin thread of hope, built entirely on a technicality. But a drowning man doesn't argue with the shape of the rope he's thrown. Cantuña agreed to the terms. The moment he did, the cold around him seemed to deepen, and the shadow figure simply said the work would begin at once. Cantuña walked home in a daze, telling himself he still had a plan, even though he had no idea yet how he'd actually pull it off. Behind him, in the unfinished courtyard, the construction site was no longer empty. Dozens of shapes had begun moving in the darkness. He worked with a speed and precision no human crew could match. Stone after stone lifted and set with unnatural, silent efficiency. There was no shouting, no exhaustion, no mistakes. Just an endless, rhythmic procession of stone being cut, carried, and fitted into place. From a distance, Night Watchman glimpsed the courtyard and immediately decided whatever was happening there was none of his business. Overseeing it all from the courtyard's edge stood the same tall, shadowed figure, arms folded, ember-red eyes tracking every stone that fell into place. Cantuña, unable to sleep, returned to the edge of the site well before dawn and watched in genuine horror at how much had already been finished. What should have taken his crew weeks had been accomplished in a matter of hours. The far half of the atrium was already nearly complete. He did the math again, faster this time, with real panic behind it. At this pace, the entire atrium would be finished long before sunrise. If every stone was placed, the contract's one loophole would disappear along with it, and so would he. He needed exactly one thing to go wrong with the demon's otherwise flawless work. Just one single stone left unplaced. Cantuña began moving along the courtyard's edge, staying low, staying in shadow, counting the remaining unfinished sections with rising dread. He spotted it near the courtyard's far corner, a single paving stone, already cut and ready, resting beside its final empty gap. The shadowy workers around it were moving toward it fast, clearly intending to set it down within minutes. Cantuña didn't have time for a clever plan. He simply lunged forward, grabbed the finished stone, and hid it beneath his own cloak. He backed into the deepest shadow he could find at the courtyard's edge and stood absolutely still, heart pounding against the stolen stone. The shadowy workers reached the empty gap, paused, and seemed genuinely confused to find no stone waiting there to be placed. For the first time all night, their eerie efficiency broke down completely. They searched and searched again and found nothing. The tall figure at the courtyard's edge went still, then turned slowly toward the eastern sky, where the faintest gray light was just beginning to show. The sky was changing, slowly but unmistakably. Somewhere behind the eastern mountains, the sun was about to rise. Shadow workers froze in place one by one as the first true rays of morning light touched the edges of the courtyard. The atrium was almost entirely finished, every single stone in place, except for one small, deliberately empty gap near the far corner. By the letter of the agreement, the work was not complete, and an incomplete contract meant nothing owed by either side. From the shadows where he'd been hiding, Cantuña finally allowed himself to breathe, still clutching the stolen stone tight against his chest. Behind him, a furious guttural sound tore through the morning quiet, more felt than heard, as the shadow workers began dissolving into smoke. The tall figure remained a moment longer than the rest, ember-red eyes fixed directly on the spot where Cantuña stood hidden in shadow. For one long, unbearable second, Cantuña was certain he'd been seen, that the technicality wouldn't matter at all in the end. But a bargain is a bargain, even for something like that. Without another word, the figure turned and simply wasn't there anymore. Cantuña stood alone in the courtyard, as the sun fully cleared the eastern peaks, the stolen stone still clutched tightly in his shaking hands. He looked down at the one small gap in the stonework, the single missing piece that had just saved everything he had. He never placed that final stone, not that morning, not ever. He decided the courtyard would simply stay one stone short, permanently. When his crew arrived that morning expecting weeks more work, they found the entire atrium finished and had no explanation for how. Cantuña told no one the full truth. He simply said the work had been finished overnight through unusual effort and left it at that. Privately, though, he understood exactly how close he'd come to losing everything, and exactly what had actually saved him. In gratitude, Cantuña spent much of his own fortune building a small chapel attached to the convent, dedicated entirely to the Virgin Mary. He became known afterward as a deeply devout man, rarely missing a single mass for the rest of his life. The chapel still stands today beside the Church of San Francisco, known simply as the Chapel of Cantuña, and the atrium in front of it still has that one missing stone, exactly where Cantuña left it centuries ago. Over the centuries, people have tried to fill that gap more than once, each time with a freshly cut replacement stone. Every single time, according to those who tend the courtyard, the new stone is gone again within days, and the gap simply reappears, as if something still remembers exactly which stone was never paid for. Tour guides walking visitors across that same stone courtyard point down at the gap and tell the story almost as a footnote. One more strange detail in a very old city. But if you stand there at dusk, when the shadows start pooling in that one small empty space, it's easy to believe that somewhere, a very old bargain is still one stone short of being settled.